At the will reading. My dad slid a folder across the polished table to my sister, Madison. She gets 11 million, he said, then looked at me like I was a stranger asking for spare change. Kate, go earn your own. The room went quiet enough for me to hear my mother's bracelet scrape against her wrist. Madison smiled. Then Grandpa's lawyer stood up with a sealed envelope in his hand. This was Arthur's final instruction, he said. It is only to be read with Kate present. My mother shot to her feet and started screaming. Before that envelope, before my mother's scream cracked the room open. I was just the quiet daughter in the Whitman family. That was my role. My parents never said it out loud, but every house has a language. Ours spoke in seating charts, photo frames, and the way my mother's smile changed depending on which daughter walked in. Madison got the front of every picture. I got the edge. At Thanksgiving, she sat beside my father, Richard, while he carved the turkey and told stories about her college awards, her charity events, her perfect taste in dresses. My mother, Elaine, would glide around the dining room with a cranberry candle burning on the sideboard, touching Madison's shoulder like she was something fragile and precious. When I talked about soil samples or drought-resistant crops, forks slowed, eyes drifted. Someone always changed the subject. I learned to stop talking before anyone had to tell me. I was 38 by then, a researcher in agricultural science, old enough to have a career, a mortgage, and a face people called beautiful in a way that still surprised me. But around my family, I became 9 years old again, hair tied back, hands folded, waiting to be noticed. Only Grandpa Arthur noticed. He lived with Grandma Eleanor in the old ranch house outside Austin, where the porch boards creaked and the wind chimes sounded like tiny bells in the dry Texas heat. When I was little, I used to sit beside him with a notebook on my knees, measuring rainfall in a glass jar and pretending I was doing something important. Arthur never laughed. He would pull out his silver pocket watch, check the time like my experiment had a deadline, and say, "Tell me what you found, Katie girl." Not Kate, not the difficult one, not Madison's strange older sister, Katie girl, my little scientist. He was the only person who made curiosity feel like a gift instead of a flaw. So, when he got sick, I called, I wrote letters, I sent articles he would have circled in red ink. My father told me Grandpa needed quiet. My mother said visits were being limited. Madison said I was making everything about myself. And because I was trained to doubt my own place in that family, I believed them. Until the funeral came and went, until the will reading, until one sealed envelope proved Arthur had never stopped waiting for me. Arthur got weaker at the end of spring. That was how my father said it. Not sick, not scared, not asking for you, just weaker. Richard took control of everything the way he always did, with a calm voice and a calendar in his hand. He said Grandpa needed rest. He said Grandma Eleanor was overwhelmed. He said too many visits would upset the routine. My mother backed him up with that soft, careful voice she used when she wanted cruelty to sound reasonable. "Honey, don't push," she told me. "This isn't about what you need." So I didn't push. I sent flowers instead, yellow tulips, because Arthur once told me they looked like sunlight standing up straight. I mailed him a newspaper clipping about farmers testing new irrigation systems. I wrote a letter on thick cream paper and told him I was working on a project he would have loved. No answer came. A week later, I called Elaine. Did he get my letter? There was a pause, just long enough to make my stomach tighten. "He's been very tired," she said. "Please don't take it personally." But I did. Of course I did. One Saturday. I couldn't stand it anymore. I baked blueberry muffins, the kind Grandpa used to eat with black coffee, and drove out to the ranch house. The road looked exactly the same. Brown grass, white fence posts, heat rising off the hood of my car. The wind chimes were moving when I stepped onto the porch, before I could knock twice. Madison opened the door. She looked polished and annoyed, wearing a cream blouse, gold earrings, and the kind of smile people use when they want you to feel small. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "I came to see Grandpa." Her hand stayed on the doorframe. "They're not here." I looked past her shoulder. The living room smelled faintly like coffee. I heard something inside. Maybe a chair shifting. Maybe a cane tapping the floor. "Madison," I said. "Is he inside?" Her eyes hardened. "Kate, don't make this about you. They moved him to a care place in the city. He doesn't need visitors dropping in and upsetting him." I stood there with warm muffins in my hands, feeling like a child who had brought the wrong gift to the wrong door. So I left. 3 weeks later. Arthur was gone. My mother told me by text, at the funeral. Madison stood in the front row, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. My father kept one arm around her shoulders. I sat behind a cousin I barely knew and stared at the closed casket, wondering if Grandpa had thought I stayed away because I didn't care. After the service, Richard told me to meet at the lawyer's office to settle things peacefully. But when Daniel Brooks walked in and saw the family agreement on the table, his face went still. "That," he said, "is not Arthur's will." I drove to the ranch house with my hands locked around the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles hurt. The sun was dropping behind the fields when Grandma Eleanor opened the door. She looked smaller than I remembered, wrapped in a faded blue cardigan, but her eyes were sharp enough to cut glass. "He waited for you," she said. Those 4 words took the air out of me. "I didn't know," I whispered. Her mouth trembled, not with sadness, but anger. "He asked for you every week, every day near the end." I stepped inside, and the house hit me all at once. Coffee in the walls, lemon oil on the old table, dust floating in the gold evening light, the same wind chimes tapping outside like they were trying to warn me too late. Eleanor brought out Arthur's notebook. Not a phone, not an address book, just his handwriting, shaky but clear, across page after page. Asked Richard to tell Kate. Asked Elaine if Kate received my letter. Madison said Kate was too busy. I read each line like it was a bruise forming under my skin. Then I told Grandma about the day I came with blueberry muffins, about Madison standing in the doorway, about the lie that Arthur had moved somewhere in the city and could not have visitors. Eleanor gripped the back of a chair. "No," she said. Her voice broke. "He was right here, in that room, waiting by the window." Something inside me folded. I sat down on the porch steps because my legs would not hold me anymore. I did not scream. I did not throw anything. I just pressed both hands to my stomach and tried to breathe through the knowledge that my family had stolen the last goodbye I would ever get. Daniel Brooks arrived an hour later. He placed Arthur's official will on the table, along with the sealed letter and a stack of payments and bills rounded into clean totals. Summer programs, research equipment, college expenses, early project funding. All those years. My parents had let me believe they were tolerating the cost of my dreams. They had paid almost none of it. Arthur had. Eleanor sat beside me, pale with fury, while Daniel explained that the will was valid, witnessed, and protected. No family agreement could erase it. No guilt trip could force my signature. No one could make Madison the chosen heir just because Richard said so. I stared at the sealed envelope. For the first time since the funeral, grief stopped being a hole and became a direction. I looked at Daniel. "Can they hear it here in this house?" he asked. I nodded. Eleanor's voice came first, quiet and hard. "Yes, where they lied." They came back to the ranch house 2 nights later. Richard walked in first, smoothing his tie like he was entering a boardroom instead of the home where his father had died. Elaine followed with her perfume floating ahead of her, sweet and sharp. Madison came last, heels clicking against the floor, her diamond bracelet flashing every time she moved her wrist. I was in the kitchen. My hand rested on the old wooden table where Grandpa used to drink black coffee and listen to me ramble about seeds, rain, and soil. The surface felt rough under my palm. The clock on the wall ticked so loudly it sounded like a warning. "From the living room," I heard Richard say. "Mother, this is unnecessary." Grandma Eleanor's voice was calm. "Sit down." Daniel opened his briefcase. Richard gave a small laugh. "We don't need a lawyer for a family conversation." Daniel did not laugh back. Arthur requested this conversation happen with me present. Silence. Then Grandma called my name. "Kate." I stepped out. Madison's face changed first, not guilt, panic. Elaine's smile fell apart. What is she doing here? Richard stood halfway. Kate. This is not the time, Madison whispered. Too fast. You weren't supposed to be here. And there it was. The first crack. Daniel looked at her, then at Richard, and began reading. Arthur left Grandma Eleanor the ranch house and lifetime financial care. Then he left me the research property outside the city, all equipment inside it, all active projects under his funding, and a protected operating fund. The remaining estate would be divided equally between Madison and me. Not all to Madison, not nothing to me. Equally. Madison shot up from the couch. No, that's wrong. Richard reached for her arm. Madison. She yanked away. No, Dad, you said if I kept visiting, if I kept smiling, if I kept playing the perfect granddaughter, he would leave it to me. You promised. The room froze. Even the wind chimes outside seemed to stop moving. Elaine made a sound like she had been slapped. Madison, stop talking. But the damage was already standing in the middle of the room. Grandma Eleanor stared at them as if she was finally seeing strangers wearing her family's faces. Daniel picked up the sealed envelope. Elaine lunged forward. No, you don't need to read that. Daniel held it out of reach. Arthur was very clear. He was sick, Elaine snapped. He didn't know what he was doing. Daniel's voice stayed flat. He signed this while fully competent, with witnesses. Then he opened the letter. To my Katie girl. He read. My knees almost gave out. Grandpa wrote that he had seen me, even when my own parents looked through me. He wrote that being quiet was not weakness, that curiosity was not a flaw, that I had spent my life making myself smaller in rooms where Madison needed to shine. Richard looked at the floor. Elaine started crying, but there were no tears in her eyes. Daniel kept reading. Arthur wrote that he knew who had paid for my education, my summer programs, my equipment, my first research work. He knew because it had been him. He wrote that he was leaving me the research property because he trusted me to build something that would outlive greed. Madison's face twisted. So, she wins. I wiped my cheeks and looked at her. No, I said. Grandpa wins. Richard tried to soften his voice. Kate, we can still handle this privately. I looked at him then. Really looked. You told me to go earn my own. His jaw tightened. So I will, but I won't give back what Grandpa gave me just because you finally lost control of the story. Grandma Eleanor stood. You lied to a dying man, she said. You stole his peace. You stole her goodbye. Get out of my house. Richard threatened court. Daniel quietly told him he had that right, but his voice had changed. For the first time in my life, my father sounded afraid. When the door closed behind them, the room did not feel empty. It felt clean. Richard did try court. Of course he did. Men like my father do not surrender control. They rename it. He called it concern. He called it protecting family harmony. He called it questioning whether Arthur had been pressured in his final months. But Daniel was ready. The will was clean. The witnesses were solid. The records were clear. The payments and bills showed a pattern going back years. Not a sudden decision made from confusion. Arthur had been building my future while my parents were busy pretending they owned it. The challenge went nowhere. Madison still received her fair share. And maybe that was the part that hurt her most. She had not been robbed. She had only been made equal. Richard and Elaine moved away from the center of my life like furniture finally dragged out of a dark room. They sent 2 emails, one cold, one emotional. I answered neither. Silence, this time, was not fear. It was a boundary. The first day I walked into the research property Arthur left me, I almost turned around. The building smelled like damp soil, metal shelves, and old dust warmed by sunlight. The greenhouse fans hummed overhead. Rows of empty work tables waited under wide windows. On one wall hung a photograph of Grandpa Arthur standing in a field, his hat pushed back, smiling like he had known I would find my way there. I touched the frame and whispered, I'm here. Then I got to work. Rachel helped me organize the first projects, Ben handled operations when grief made paperwork feel impossible. We cleaned the labs, reopened the greenhouse, and built programs for small farmers who needed better tools, not bigger promises. A year later, we started a summer science camp. That was where I met Lily. She was 13, thin as a pencil, with thick glasses and a notebook clutched to her chest like a shield. During lunch, while the other kids ate pizza under the shade canopy, Lily showed me pages of messy notes about bees and wildflowers. Then she lowered her voice and asked, "Is this stupid?" I heard my younger self in that question, so I sat beside her on the bench and read every page. "No," I told her. "This is careful. This is curious. This matters." She blinked like no adult had ever said those 3 words to her before. Grandma Eleanor moved into a small place close to mine. Every morning, I brought her coffee, and every morning, we learned how to love each other without lies between us. 6 years later, Madison came back. No diamonds, no perfect smile. Just a woman standing in the lobby, asking if she could volunteer at the camp. I did not hug her. I did not pretend one apology could erase what she took. I handed her a box of pencils and said, "Start by listening." And she did. That fall, Eleanor gave me Arthur's silver pocket watch. Inside was a picture of me at 15, holding my science fair ribbon. On the edge, in his handwriting, were the words I needed my whole life. "My little scientist will change the world her own way. Now." Every fall. I sit on the old bench behind the ranch house and listen to the wind chimes move over the porch, the same sound used to make me ache. Now it feels like an answer. I hold Grandpa's pocket watch in my hand, the silver warmed by my palm, and I look toward the greenhouse lights glowing in the distance. Somewhere inside, kids like Lily are filling notebooks with questions nobody has taught them to be ashamed of yet. I think about what my father said that day. Go earn your own. For a while, I thought those words were meant to break me, but he was wrong about that, too. I did earn my own. Not the money, not the building, not even the name on the paperwork. I earned my peace, and I learned that family is not the people who make you disappear so they can feel comfortable. Family is the person who sees you clearly when everyone else looks away. If you have ever had to protect your peace from your own family, you are not alone. Share your story in the comments. And hit subscribe so you do not miss the next one. Because sometimes the truth waits quietly, but when it finally speaks, the whole room changes.